In the history of Rome, few emperors left such a disturbing mark as Caligula. A man who, on the surface, had all the power and glory, but within him harbored a dangerous obsession with divinity and control. An emperor who felt so invincible that he not only defied the gods, but also turned his own people into spectators of his darkest acts. How is it possible that a man who started out as a promising young man transformed into the most feared and hated ruler of the Roman Empire? To understand his tragic fall, we must go beyond titles and victories. We need to look at the man behind the emperor, a man marked by tragedy, absolute power, and, above all, madness. In this video, we delve into the life of Caligula, a man who went from being an admired young man to an emperor whose decisions defied all logic. Join us on this journey to the heart of imperial Rome, where ambition, excess, and power mixed into a deadly cocktail. If this story intrigues you, give it a like and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the darkest corners of Roman history. Let's discover what led Caligula to cross that line between emperor and monster. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, was born on August 31, 12 AD in the coastal city of Antium, into one of the most influential families in Rome. The son of the famous general Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder, his lineage was marked by his father's military glory and his mother's political nobility. But the greatness of his blood was matched by the tragedy that would mark his life. As a child, Caligula accompanied his father on his military campaigns, and it was there that he earned the nickname that would stay with him forever, Caligula, meaning little boots. This nickname, referring to the small boots he wore to accompany the troops, initially seemed a symbol of affection. However, it would be only the beginning of a life marked by brutality, excess, and the transformation of a child with dreams of glory into an emperor whose name would be remembered for his madness. The death of his father in Syria under mysterious circumstances was the first major blow in his life. Many suspected that he was murdered on the orders of Sejanus, the feared prefect of the Praetorian Guard, or even by the Emperor Tiberius himself. The tragedy didn't stop there. Agrippina, his mother, publicly accused Tiberius of being involved in her husband's death and was exiled. His siblings also died, leaving Caligula as one of the few survivors of his family. Although Tiberius did not kill him, Caligula lived under his strict surveillance on the island of Capri, a place that would prove crucial to his development. There, amidst luxurious banquets and political maneuvering, the young man quickly learned that in Rome, it wasn't the righteous who survived, but the cunning. It was in this environment, full of intrigue and excess, where Caligula forged his destiny and where the emperor who would ultimately seize power was born. When Tiberius died, Caligula ascended to the imperial throne. At first, his arrival was met with jubilation by the Roman people. The young emperor freed prisoners, forgave debts, and organized spectacles to please the population. In the eyes of the people, it seemed that Rome had gained a new Augustus, an emperor willing to restore the greatness of Rome and provide citizens with the stability they longed for. But this image of benevolence didn't last long. Shortly after assuming power, Caligula fell seriously ill, which caused him to disappear from the public eye for a while. When he returned, something inside him had changed. His illness had left its mark, and not just physically, it had also left a psychological scar that would transform his way of ruling. What the people hoped for turned into a government of absolute control. From the time of his recovery, Caligula began to present himself as more than just an emperor. Now, he was not only the most powerful man in Rome, but he began to believe he was a living deity. From that moment on, Roman politics ceased to be what it once was. Caligula did not rule simply as an emperor, but as a god among men. The desire to be worshipped and revered by all, not only as emperor but as a divine being, became his obsession. From that moment on, it was no longer enough to rule the empire, he sought the devotion, fear, and adoration of all Romans. As Caligula's reign advanced, his obsession with power and worship reached new heights. The young emperor not only wished to be the most powerful man in the empire, but he began to believe that he was, in fact, an incarnated god. One of his first acts as the self-proclaimed living god was to order that the statues of the most revered gods in Rome be decapitated and that their heads be replaced with his own. This act, beyond being a mere display of arrogance, was a symbolic declaration of war against the very Roman gods that had been worshipped for centuries. Publicly and defiantly, Caligula proclaimed himself divine, and his image was erected in the most sacred temples, an unimaginable act in traditional Rome. In his imperial palace, Caligula presented himself as a living deity, dressed in golden tunics, sparkling crowns, and surrounded by incense and chants. Each public appearance became a theatrical spectacle where his figure transformed into that of a god, not only in his court but also in the minds of the Roman people. One of his most controversial gestures was the attempt to place a statue of his own likeness in the Temple of Jerusalem, the holiest place in Judaism. This act not only provoked outrage among the Jews, but it nearly sparked a revolt across the region. Only the intervention of Herod Agrippa I, a close friend of Caligula, prevented an open war. As the months passed, Caligula's behavior became increasingly erratic, leading his reign into a series of surreal episodes. Perhaps one of the strangest was the famous war against Neptune. During a campaign on the northern coast of Gaul, the emperor ordered his troops to form ranks facing the sea and attack the waves with drawn swords. The goal, to defeat the god Neptune, the lord of the ocean. The soldiers, following the emperor's orders, attacked the sea as if it were a tangible enemy, hoping to conquer a god. After the battle, Caligula ordered that seashells be collected, which he presented as war trophies. The emperor celebrated this victory with a parade in Rome, showing the people his achievements in what clearly appeared to be an act of pure madness. Was this a political satire to humiliate the Roman army? An act of overflowing insanity? Or perhaps, a symbolic attempt to show that even gods could be subjected to his will? Whatever the reason, the truth is that this episode, and others like it, made it clear that Caligula no longer lived in the same world as the rest of his subjects. This was just one of the many surreal episodes that defined his reign. In an empire where the decisions of emperors had enormous consequences, Caligula began crossing boundaries that no one had dared to imagine. His reign became a constant mixture of theater, violence, and absolute delirium. Throughout his reign, one of the most prominent aspects of Caligula's personality was his extreme vanity. This emperor not only desired to be worshipped as a god, but he also longed for everything around him to reflect his greatness and superiority. His obsession with his image was so intense that he would spend hours in front of mirrors, practicing threatening expressions, perfecting his face to make it appear frightening, even without saying a word. History tells that Caligula not only feared not being remembered as a god, but he also had great insecurities about his appearance. He was known for having thin legs, a hairy neck, and sunken eyes, which gave him a disturbing appearance. In fact, it is said that he would become furious if anyone referenced his baldness, and as a result, he issued a decree preventing anyone from standing above him in public so no one could see his baldness. His vanity was not only reflected in his attitude toward his personal appearance but also in the extreme measures he took to ensure that everyone regarded him as divine. Caligula began to appear in public dressed as Oriental gods, sometimes as Venus, or even as a woman, challenging traditional Roman norms and making it clear that he did not want to be seen as an ordinary emperor, but as a figure superior to all. But, as expected, his obsession with image and power became a disorder that led him to commit increasingly irrational acts, always seeking more power, more control, and more worship. One of the most symbolic and surreal gestures in Caligula's life was his famous relationship with his horse, Incitatus. Caligula not only gave special attention to his horse, but he took his devotion to him to ridiculous extremes. Incitatus was not just any animal, he was an important member of the imperial court. The emperor ordered a marble stable to be built for him, with jeweled collars and his own servants, as if he were an aristocrat. But Caligula didn't stop there. Madness reached its peak when, according to historical sources, the emperor decided to appoint his horse as consul. Yes, you heard it right, the horse Incitatus was announced as the next consul of Rome, the highest title a man could attain in Roman politics. For many historians, this was not just an act of eccentricity, but a clear provocation to the Senate, a way to show that Caligula considered the institution so useless that even a horse could take its place. This gesture was not only a mockery of the Senate but also a way to reaffirm Caligula's absolute power. Through his horse, Caligula made it clear that his will was law, that there were no rules or institutions that could challenge his dominion. Incitatus represented, in a way, the ultimate expression of imperial madness, a symbol of the collapse of rationality in Roman governance. Although this episode may seem like just another eccentricity, it actually reveals Caligula's disconnection from reality and his growing disdain for the Roman system, which was no longer useful to him. Incitatus was the last reminder that the emperor was no longer ruling with reason, but with an inflated ego and an obsession with power that went beyond any logic. After 4 years of rule, Caligula's reign came to an end in a scene as brutal as it was unexpected. In the year 41 AD, a group of Praetorian Guard officers, led by Cassius Chaerea, who had been publicly humiliated by the emperor several times, assassinated him in a corridor of the imperial palace. It was not just a political assassination, it was the end of a reign marked by delusion and cruelty. Despite his absolute power, Caligula could not escape the betrayals that were brewing in the shadows. His erratic behavior and growing contempt for those he was supposed to govern made him vulnerable. Senators, officers, and members of his own guard came together to end his life, fearing that his whims would ultimately lead the empire to collapse. The assassination of Caligula triggered a swift reaction in Rome. After his death, the Senate attempted to restore the Republic, but the Praetorian Guard had already proclaimed Claudius, Caligula's uncle, as the new emperor. Caligula's reign had come to an end, but his legacy did not disappear with him. His figure remained in the memory of Rome as an example of what can happen when absolute power falls into the hands of an unstable person. Caligula left an indelible mark on history, not only for the madness of his rule but also for the lesson his reign left us. When absolute power meets the insecurities and traumas of a man, the result can be devastating not only for the ruler but for an entire civilization. The story of Caligula is that of a man whose power and vanity led him into a spiral of madness and cruelty. An emperor who began his reign with promises of greatness and prosperity but quickly became a symbol of the destructive power of absolute abuse. Through his reign, Caligula not only challenged the political norms of Rome but also the fundamental rules of humanity. His story is an eternal warning of what happens when power slips from control and becomes a sick obsession. His legacy is marked not only by madness but by the fall of an empire that, in many ways, never fully recovered from the mark Caligula left on it. If this story surprised you as much as it did me, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the most controversial and enigmatic figures of Roman history. What do you think of Caligula's reign? Which act of his government seems most disturbing to you? Leave us your opinion in the comments and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode.